If you got married or divorced in a foreign country, do you know that your marriage or the divorce may not even be valid? Let's talk about it. I am U.S. immigration attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenship for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. The first thing you need to consider before you file your marriage-based I-130 is, was your foreign divorce valid? Okay, was the divorce valid? Because if the divorce is not considered valid, then that divorce does not count. You are still technically legally married to your previous spouse. So your current marriage would not be recognized. So you are basically practicing polygamy. I know. You thought your divorce was real, but now you're finding out it's not. And what do you do? Let's talk about what would make a foreign divorce not recognized in the US. First thing is, were you and your spouse residing in the country when the divorce took place? Okay, if you got married in a foreign country, you may be thinking to yourself that you need to also get divorced in that foreign country for it to be legal. Well, here's the thing that most people don't consider and don't even think about. In order for the US to recognize your foreign divorce, either you or the person you're divorcing has to be a resident of the country where you're getting the divorce. That is a flat requirement. So whether you want to divorce the person or the person wants to divorce you, you can only do it in a foreign country and have it recognized in the US if you and the person that you're divorcing live in that country. So if your spouse lives in the foreign country, then you can get divorced in that country. If you live in the foreign country, then you can get divorced in the foreign country. But if neither of you live in the foreign country and you got divorced there, that's not going to work. USCIS is going to catch on to it, and you are going to now have an I-130 request for evidence saying, hey, were you actually free to marry? Is this marriage actually real? Because your divorce doesn't seem to be real. So you really want to pay attention to make sure that you are getting divorced correctly. So that's the first thing. Is the divorce valid? Because again, if the divorce is not valid, then the subsequent marriage is not valid. And like I said, either you or the person you're divorcing has to be a resident of the country where the divorce is taking place. The USCIS, the US government, recognizes proxy marriages, but they do not recognize proxy divorces. So if you want to get a divorce, one of you has to be a resident of that country where you're getting a divorce. And I see this a lot where people think just because I got married in that country, I also have to get divorced in that country. That is not true. If you are a resident of the US, and in most states, they have a residency requirement before you can file for divorce in that state. So if you've been living, for example, in Massachusetts for at least 6 months, you can file for divorce in Massachusetts, whether you got married here or not. So that's something, if you have ever wondered whether you can get a divorce in the state that you're currently living in the US, you can. There's a process you need to go through, especially if your spouse that you're divorcing lives outside of the US. There's a whole process for that. But to be 100,000% sure that that divorce is going to be recognized, it is in your best interest to do that divorce where you are living and make sure that you can stand on it and say, yes, it was legal. Here's all the process we went through the state court in the US to get this divorce done. Now, that's the first part. So if one of you were residing in this country where the divorce took place, the next question is, when you're looking at the divorce decree from that country, this is not usually the case in the US where you have to worry about this, but typically in a foreign country, they may make some decisions in the divorce decree that is not true. Or it's just like a blanket thing that they just fill out forms and they're not really putting in the actual couple's situation. So you want to also look at, does the reason for divorce match your reality? So I have seen a situation where it says that the couple didn't have any children and that the reason for divorce is that they haven't lived together for like 3 years. Okay? So just listen to that. The reason for divorce, according to this foreign decree, is that the parties have not lived together for at least 3 years and they do not have any children together. And that's the reason for the divorce. However, the reality is that they were living together up until the divorce was filed. They did have multiple children together. Now, when USCIS is looking at that, this person came to the US with a visa where they said on their visa application and in their interview that they are married and they are living with their spouse. And that is part of the reason they were given the visa, because they had this tie to their home country, which is their spouse and their children. But now your divorce decree is telling USCIS and is telling the US government that the information you gave them on that visa application may not have been 100% true, because your divorce decree is saying that you have not lived with your spouse for 3 years before the divorce, which was in the same window that you were telling the embassy that you were married and you had children and you live with them, and that's the reason that you plan on going back after your stay in the US is over. So you see how that can be a problem. Now this person is tearing down a misrepresentation issue. It is a whole process that you need to really pay attention to. If you choose to get divorced outside of the US, you need to pay attention to every single thing and make sure that everything on that divorce decree, on the divorce filing, everything is actually accurate. Do not just leave it to the spouse that's over there to do this. Make sure you have your own attorney that is looking through and making sure that everything on that divorce filing is accurate and does not jeopardize your status in the US. And then finally, you want to look at whether the document that you have to show that foreign divorce, is it actually the document that USCIS wants to see or that the State Department wants to see. So for each country, when you get a foreign divorce, for each country, the US government actually has a reciprocity chart where they say what the divorce document is supposed to look like. There are countries where the reciprocity chart shows multiple types of divorce certificates, divorce decrees. Again, this typically happens in countries where there's multiple religions and those religions are allowed to have their own type of divorce. So for example, India is a big one where you can either have a Muslim divorce, a Hindu divorce, or a general covenant divorce. So in those countries, you want to make sure that the document that you're presenting to USCIS is actually the document that they want. Okay, don't just give them anything you think is the right document. The reciprocity chart will tell you exactly what the divorce document is supposed to look like, what the name of it is, and how and where to get it. I have seen this so many times where someone may go to their local government and get some document that says they're divorced, while the country's reciprocity chart shows that they need to get a divorce from the high court of that country. So if you are not getting a divorce from the high court and your document is showing like a local government instead of the high court, your divorce is not going to be recognized because that's the wrong document. Okay, so if you did not actually end up going to the high court and getting the divorce through the high court, that divorce from the local government does not count. So you may have to start over. So that's really the essence of why I'm doing this video, is that you want to make sure that that foreign divorce is valid, that it says exactly how your divorce ended, all the information on that divorce decree is accurate. And finally, you want to make sure that the evidence that you're giving USCIS about that foreign divorce is the right document, because if it's not the right document, USCIS is just going to turn around and send you a request for evidence for that document, and then you're going to have basically a delay in your case. Now, I know I have given you some, make sure you do these things. Now, let's talk about how you can fix things if you're in a situation where the divorce may not be valid. If you are in a situation where your foreign divorce is not valid because either you and your spouse did not live in the country when the divorce took place, well, there may still be hope for you. In most states, you can file a petition to basically have your foreign divorce recognized in your state. And if your foreign divorce is recognized in your state, they will give you basically a document saying that that foreign divorce is recognized, and then you can use that documentation to file your I-130, and that would be recognized by USCIS. The second thing that you may be able to do if you are not able to get that foreign divorce recognized in your state is to actually file for divorce in your state. Okay, you can file for divorce in your state. Once that divorce is final, you can remarry your spouse, right? The one that you're filing the I-130 for, or the one that's filing an I-130 for you. You can then remarry, and now your marriage will be valid and your divorce will be valid. Okay, so that's another option. In some states, however, you may not have to do the remarriage part of that. In Massachusetts, for example, we have a law that says if you get married before your divorce is final, or before you get divorced from your prior spouse, your marriage is not going to be recognized by the state of Massachusetts unless and until that divorce becomes final. So that the date that divorce to your ex becomes final, your new marriage becomes legal. So you don't have to remarry. You just have to make sure that that divorce is final. So it's not every state that does this. I just know Massachusetts does this, and it is enshrined in the state laws. So do not, I repeat, do not think this applies to your state without talking to a family law attorney in your state. This is very state specific when it comes to divorce and marriage. It is a very state specific thing. So you want to make sure that you are in a state that would recognize the marriage automatically once that divorce becomes final. If you're not in one of those states, like Massachusetts, you need to make sure that once that divorce becomes final, you actually remarry your spouse. Once you remarry your spouse, your marriage is now legal and valid, and the divorce is now legal and valid, and you can move forward with your I-130 petition. But what if you are in the middle of your I-130 petition and receive a request for evidence for documentation proving that you were legally able to get married? Well, it depends, again, in what state you're in. If you're able to get divorced quickly and fix the whole thing. In most states, if your foreign divorce is not valid, or you got married before your foreign divorce became final, or your divorce in general became final, you're going to be in a situation where you get that request for evidence, and the only thing you can really do is to remarry your spouse or to do something called an affirmation of marriage. Okay, so let's say your foreign divorce is final, or your divorce in the US is final. However, you married your spouse before that divorce became final. You can then ask a court to affirm your marriage to the date that that divorce became final. So that is a separate case that you can do in your state court. Again, this is state specific. In Massachusetts, we call it an affirmation of marriage, and you file a petition with the court. You get a whole summons, you go in front of a judge, the judge makes the decision affirming the marriage. Now you don't have to worry about that marriage or get remarried and all of that. So there are steps you can take to try and fix a foreign divorce being invalid or being married before that foreign divorce becomes final. You want to make sure that you are looking at your state specific laws and making sure that those issues can be fixed. A final tip here: if you got married in a foreign country, but your divorce is not final yet, whether you filed for divorce in the US or in that foreign country, you need to look at that foreign country's laws to see if your marriage is legal in that country. So that's one thing, right? So you got divorced, you got married in a foreign country. The question is, if that divorce was not final before you got married in a foreign country, will that foreign country recognize your marriage once your divorce is final? That is the question that you need to make sure that you answer before you do anything else. So the foreign country needs to recognize the marriage, and your state needs to also recognize the marriage. So just because the foreign country recognizes the marriage does not mean that your state in the US is also going to recognize the marriage. And this comes up a lot in, like, let's say a first cousin marriage. Some countries allow for first cousin marriages. Some states in the US allow for first cousin marriages. However, if you go to a foreign country and do a first cousin marriage, but the state you live in the US does not recognize first country marriages, it does not count in the US. Okay, so typically in those situations, people will decide to move to a state that recognizes first cousin marriages before they file their I-130, so that not only is that marriage legal in the country it took place in, but it's also legal in the US. So that's something else to keep in mind that really ties in with the foreign divorce issue, because the foreign marriage can also be an issue if it's not legally recognizable in that country, right? If it's not valid in that country, then it may not be valid in the US as well. If you're watching this video and you are not sure if your foreign divorce will be recognized, if you have the right documentation for your foreign divorce, or if your foreign marriage would be recognized in the US, well, go ahead and schedule a strategy session with me. It is a 15-minute session where we talk about your situation. We talk about how we can help you and what steps you need to take to make sure that that foreign divorce or foreign marriage can be recognized in the US. If you want to schedule that strategy session, you can go to my website, lilylegal.com, click on Contact Us, where you can pick a date and time that works best for you for us to talk about your situation.